Okay, well, the season for golden eagles is upon us. That's fall, winter, and spring. Flying a golden eagle is flying from Ed Levin over to Mission and then back to Ed Levin. Um, and it's kind of different than being told what to do by your instructor because a lot of different things can happen. It's not like you could be given a flight plan and fly it and it'll work. You have to make your decisions as you're flying and decide what to do next and where to go on the fly, so to speak. Um, anyway, I'll go through a bunch of different golden eagles. We'll go through uh, sort of the basics first. First thing is you really kind of need to know how to ridge soar, how to thermal, and how to glide. Um, those three things are kind of important. Uh, Definitely need to fly with the phone, 2-meter radio if you got it, as well as everything you need to pack up your glider, your harness, and all of that stuff. Really good to be familiar with the Mission LZs, top and bottom. If you're kind of not okay with landing at Mission, probably you'd want to not be okay with flying Golden Eagle. So, and next thing is, what kind of day is a Golden Eagle day? Typically, the best days are ones where you have a high thermal ceiling, high cloud base, not much wind. Those are the good ones. If you've got a day that you have nice, easy climbs, up pretty high, not that much drift, that's good. If the climbs are tough, thermals are uncooperative, lots of wind, sink, turbulence, not so good. Usually the wind is from the south in the morning and from the west or northwest in the afternoon. So that means going from Ed Levin to Mission is easier earlier in the day. Getting from Mission to Ed Levin is easier later in the day. So if you're soaring Ed Levin and it's really south, and likely to stay south all day, maybe the Golden Eagle really isn't a good thing because you could get to Mission and find out it's not soarable there at all, and you end up landing there. On the other hand, if you're climbing over Ed Levin and getting higher and higher and kind of starting to drift away from Mission, then it's time to go. Remember to go a little faster because you're gliding into the wind. If you can get the next thermal or two, you're good. One of the really important things is don't land out. You can land in the Mission landing zone. That's okay. Ed Levin is fine. But I haven't seen any place in between the two that I'd really like to land. There's a lot of hills, but not too many good places to land. So I'd really avoid that. If you're at the top of the mountain, you could probably make whatever landing zone is downwind. Into the wind, your results may vary. So, keep an eye on where you are. One of the important things is that if what you're doing isn't working, don't keep going until you get so low that you have to land in some sketchy or dangerous place. Turn around and get back to an LZ you can get to, or back to some place where you can stay up and hope it gets better. Then one of the things I found that's kind of a little bit interesting is if you're kind of struggling to get around one of these ridges here, and heading into the wind and trying to get around the ridge, you might expect that on the other side of the ridge, the wind would be that same direction and it would be blowing up the ridge. And I found a lot of times that's not really true. What'll happen is the wind is just splitting the ridge and it's kind of just blowing across the ridge on one side and across the ridge on the other side. And it may not be any better on the other side than it is on the side you're on. And the big thing about it is there's really no guarantees, no guarantee you'll get there, no guarantee you'll get back. So it's one of those things where you have to use your judgment as you're flying. That said, to attempt a Golden Eagle and then end up down in the Ed Levin landing zone, you can learn a lot more doing that than just noodling around over the top of Ed Levin until it turns northwest and flushes everyone anyway. So let's start going through the flight tracks here, and we'll kind of go through a representative set of golden eagles. This was kind of an easy one, but we're not going to talk about that one right now. We're going to start with some of the other ones here. Let's see here. Okay, now this was a day that was somewhat soarable at Ed Levin, but not a golden eagle day, because you can see all the climbs. It's like, here's a climb, and you can see that the wind is pretty south, maybe even a little bit southeast. And just from the amount of drift in the thermals, you can see it's pretty strong south, which means that you get over to Mission, it'd be real easy to get to Mission. You know, you could, in this amount of wind with a glider that had a pretty decent glide, you could probably launch at Ed Levin and just go straight to Mission and make it there. But the chances of it being soarable there is probably nil. And the Mission landing zone is not really good in a south wind. So this today was totally not a golden eagle day. So let's try another day here. Okay, this one, we can see that this one, the wind looks, it's kind of turning westerly here, which is kind of a good direction. But the thing is, you can see launch off at 11, sort of head north, and yeah, it's not really happening. Look around, don't find anything. This is one of those days when, you know, it seemed like it was kind of soarable, but really kind of wasn't happening as far as golden eagle. Aha, there we go. This looks like one where I took off, kind of climbed out here. This is the typical sort of go past the rock pile and start climbing out of the canyons here. But you can see there's like a couple of attempts here, and that's as far as I got. And I'm not sure why that was. I didn't really write down in any detail, but looks like there was no next thermal. Starting to get low, and decided, and you can see from the drift, that's interesting because the drift is like changing. You know, some of the thermals are drifting this way, some are drifting that way. Maybe the climbs weren't very high. But this day kind of looked like, well, I could make it to the big tower here, but all the way to Mission just didn't seem like it was happening. Let's go for the next one here. Oh, this one looks like it worked. Okay, so a lot of flying around at 11. There's the typical kind of first thermal. This first canyon here is usually the tip off of, is this going to work or not? Because you find a thermal coming up out of the canyon and climb up, then head north and see how it goes. This looks like this one worked pretty well. A couple of turns over the peak. Couple more thermals in between. Yeah, this is kind of showing you typically what they look like. Head north, thermal up out of the canyon. I'm not saying this is the only way to fly golden eagle or even the best way, but it's what's worked for me. The interesting thing about this one is there's a certain amount of ridge soaring in front of the peak. Here it is going back and forth and climbing up in front of the peak at Mission. This is the launch at Mission is right over here. The landing zone is down here. This is one where there's a bunch of thermaling at Ed Levin and then only ridge soaring at Mission. So one of the lessons is be flexible. You know, whatever's working, go with it and make it work. Now this one is kind of interesting. You can see take off from Ed Levin, thermal up, head over to Mission, and try ridge soaring the peak a little bit. Try thermaling out in front of the slide at Mission, and that doesn't seem to be really working very well. So, well, maybe I'll just top land at Mission, and maybe it'll get better, or maybe it won't. But um, anyway, if you're down in the Mission landing zone and it gets better, that's not going to really do much good. But if you're still on top at Mission, well, that could work. There we go. This is launching off Mission. This one and the previous one were on the same day, about it looks like a couple hours apart. So it looks like it did get better at Mission. Here's the launch off Mission. Climb out, climb a little bit more, and then head back to Ed Levin. Whether landing on Mission and waiting 2 hours for it to get better and then flying back to Ed Levin, whether that's a golden eagle or not, well, that's a subject for people who like to argue. Okay, let's just move on here. Okay, let's see what is this one here. This one is okay. I think that this one, as I recall, it was a bit southerly that day. And so got to Mission, and then it took me about 3 tries to get back. Spent a lot of time thermaling, and you can see from this climb here, I think that's the way that's going. It's pretty southerly, but then finally got high enough to get above the mountain and get a glide back. So here's one with lots of thermaling. See, what's interesting here is that you can see the wind direction in this thermal changes from where the thermal started to where it ended up. This one looks like it took a couple of tries to get back. This is the don't just keep going until you sink out and can't stay up. If it's not working, go back to where you can stay up. Wait till it gets better, try again. Fair amount of flying around at Ed Levin on this one as well. If there's any sort of typical golden eagle, you might, I'm not even sure such a thing exists, but this is kind of what they seem to be. You know, head out here, climb up, find another thermal. I think this thermal was on the way, and I think this thermal was on the way back, and get back to Ed Levin. And one of the things you'll notice from all of this is it's all done with thermals. There's a few places where there might be a little bit of ridge soaring, but it's mostly thermals that will get you up. Thermaling and gliding are basically the way that it works. Here's the kind of glide out, find the thermal out of the canyon, climb up, another thermal, another glide, another climb, another glide. And that's kind of the way they typically go. So you've seen pretty much the route that I usually fly. I'm not saying that's the only route, but it seems to be the one that works for me. So that's pretty much for the end of the flight tracks. I think at this point, let's just go for the questions, and I probably said about all I need to really say about this stuff. So let's see if anyone has any questions here.
Hey, Karl, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing. How do you know you have enough altitude to really start going when you've hooked that first thermal out of Ed Levin? I mean, is it just a judgment call, or?
Yeah, it's pretty much of a judgment call. I mean, sometimes if all you can get is maybe 1,000 feet over the top of Ed Levin, which is, 3,300 feet, 3,400 feet. Um, that that might be good enough. A lot of it depends on how the day feels. Is if the day feels like the thermals are pretty cooperative and the climbs are fairly easy, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of sink or headwind, even if the climbs don't go that high, 3,500 feet, it might be worth a try. On the other hand, if the climbs are slow and the thermals are really hard to center and not cooperative, and it takes you a lot of work to get up to 3,300 feet, and you find that there's a lot of sink between the thermals, it feels windy, that's probably not good. On the other hand, if you're climbing and you get up to 4,500 feet, that's kind of a different ball game. Because the only way you're going to get to 4,500 feet is if the climbs are fairly easy and fairly fast. Because if they're sketchy, they just don't go that high. So it is kind of a judgment call. Does the day feel like a day where it's going to be easy to stay up? Or does it feel like a day where it's not going to be easy to stay up? And it's sort of like the harder the day is, the more altitude you want, before you head out. If it seems like like it's really easy to get to 3,500 feet, that's one thing. But if you're struggling and struggling and struggling, and finally you got there, that's quite a different thing. And it really is kind of a judgment call. Like I said, it sort of depends on how the day feels. And, some days you might feel adventurous and other days not so much.
Great, thanks. And is there a how do I say, like an optimal altitude to be able to glide to either? Like, say if you're even with what is it, Monument Peak, or no, is it I forget the name of the next one with the tower on it. But if you're like that high, Allison, thank you. Can you glide back to Ed Levin and at least land at Mission, or no?
The real big factor here is the wind, because if you're gliding with the wind, like for example, in this picture, if the wind is kind of turned westerly or northwesterly, and you're gliding back to Ed Levin, you can get an amazingly good glide. On the other hand, if you're gliding into the wind, your glide is not going to be that great.
Yeah.
In fact, there was just watching Tony fly at Mission from the top. We were watching him kind of head north, out past the slide. And the thing was, by then the wind was pretty north. It was almost completely parallel to the ridge. And he's out there pretty low. And my remark was, he could be out there scary low, and with that wind, turn back to the LZ and still make it with plenty of altitude. And that's what happened. And, if somebody was just kind of looking at where he was without really understanding the effect of the wind on his glide, they would be thinking, oh man, he's way out there. But, he turned downwind, he gets to the LZ with a lot of altitude. And then as he's kind of thermaling over RC Hill, he's not drifting very far from the LZ at all, because now the LZ's upwind. And so, it was a matter of his being aware that downwind, he could glide for a long way, but upwind, not so much. So he didn't go very far downwind of the landing zone until he came back with plenty of altitude to fly over the sock and look at it and do a landing pattern. And so it really depends on which is downwind, which way the wind is blowing. That's what, if you're kind of halfway in between and you're kind of starting to sink down the mountain, you definitely want to head downwind, because that's going to get the best glide. Is that making any sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
I have a question for Karl. Could you tell us a little bit about the seasons, when some of these flights like happen, and then if there's one prevailing season that's sort of more reliable, or pre and post frontal also works for these sorts of routes, or is it mostly like late summer thermal kind of? I don't know if you could talk about seasons maybe.
Yeah, I've got a bunch of dates here, and I'm looking at the dates for these flights, and it looks like March and April are pretty good. April is definitely probably the best month. And then the other months, November is good. Even December is good. Summertime, like June or July, not so good. Usually it depends on having a weather front move in. The typical summertime weather pattern really isn't good for flying golden eagles, because what we need is to have some unstable air move in and have the thermals, going high enough where you can actually go ahead and fly the task. And that's typically tends to be in the fall, winter, and spring. A lot of times in the winter time, the Ed Levin road will be all wet. So you can't really get up the mountain and fly, after it's rained. I think a lot of these days are kind of days sort of between fronts where like if one single front goes through, what'll happen is Ed Levin will be really soarable and it'll be really south. So that's not a good golden eagle condition. And then it'll rain. And then as the rain ends, it'll switch to northwesterly. And you can't get up Ed Levin because it just rained. And then Mission will be good, but that's not really going to work for golden eagle. I think the best conditions are fronts that are coming in without enough moisture to actually rain. That's probably the best condition, because then for a certain period of time, it'll be thermally at Ed Levin and Mission as the front is moving through. And if it doesn't have enough moisture to rain, that's a good condition. And that usually tends to happen. Like I was looking at all these dates, I could, figure out some statistics, but it really kind of looks like April is good, because that's when the rains are kind of slacking off and the fronts tend to come through. There's still unstable air, but there's not enough moisture in them to actually rain. And that's probably the best condition. Though that can happen any time of the year. Though it's more rare that it happens in the summertime.
That's excellent. Thank you so much. That really is a enlightening answer. I had one more quick question, was just about your first waypoint that you kind of talked about, the canyon there. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that in detail, the topography. Like, so from a intermediate perspective, like if, let's say I have a day where I get to a decent altitude, and I want to try a first waypoint that's sort of a first good reaching off point, where like with this canyon kind of be where you find your first thermals kind of decision point. Could you talk a little bit about that waypoint and maybe the topography as it relates to getting back and all that?
Yeah, right. Let me see if I can find, oh yeah, there we go. All right, so we'll see if we can get oriented here. Okay, so this right here, there's the good old towers at Ed Levin. See the switchbacks, and so there's the kind of the west launch and the south launch over here. So let's go back a little bit. Okay, so this is when you're standing on launch, you look off to the right just a little bit. There's that kind of the rock pile here. And then there's kind of a big ravine. And then here's kind of the first ridge. It's not really that apparent, from the Google Earth here, but here's the first ridge. And so basically you take off and head over in this direction. And my experience seems to be a lot of times the thermals come kind of more out of the canyon than they do off the top of the ridge. And so what I'll do is I'll kind of glide past the rock pile. Of course, if you run into something that's really good and you can climb out, just go ahead and climb in it, if it's offered to you, take it. But typically glide out here and then, get out over the canyon a bit, see if you can climb out. But definitely keep an eye on your glide back to the landing zone. And the important thing is you don't want to allow yourself to slide too far down the ridge, because what you could do is you could be like, you're a few hundred feet over the ridge and then it's not working. So you're a few hundred feet over the ridge and that's not working. And then you head out and you're a few hundred feet over the ridge and it kind of all looks the same until you get down here. And then all of a sudden you look at where the landing zone is and it's like a long ways away. So the important thing is just don't get flushed down the canyon, kind of keep an eye on the landing zone. And, if you're not climbing up out of the canyon, actually the best thing to do is get out here, give it a little bit. If it doesn't work pretty quick, just go ahead and bail. And then, and this I've actually done this and had it work, is just kind of pull VG or whatever you can do to get your glide as best you can, and then glide, past the 600-foot hill, kind of out over the stables. Because if it's northwest, a lot of times there's a convergence. The wind will like split. Let me kind of zoom back here. What'll happen is the wind, now we're on a wholly different scale here. See, there's Mission's up here, Ed Levin's here, and the wind will be coming down like this. And what'll happen is it'll split and it'll go around the mountain on both sides and then kind of converge back here. And so if you leave this canyon high enough and glide past the 600, try this area, like kind of, a little past the 1,200-foot bowl, maybe out to the stables, because there can be a convergence out there and the thermals will get trapped in it and go on up. And so rather than kind of just trying to climb out of the canyon until the bitter end, give it a few, a little bit. And if it's not working, time to head back here, because that convergence can work. And then you're kind of, you're just past the 600-foot hill. You're almost over the landing zone. You definitely don't want to get too far out there, but, thermals will come out of the landing zone and then kind of get caught in that convergence and go on up, and that can work. That felt like a little bit of a digression, but
that's really good, actually. I think I've seen you climb out from that area above the stables that you talk about. That's yeah, it's really good to look at it with you looking over the satellite view as it is. So thanks.
Sure.
So my question here is what type of glider would be something you would want to fly in this? I know something with VG, but like a topless, or you want to explain on that a little bit?
Well, most of the Golden Eagles I've flown have been with topless gliders. I think mostly with my Lightspeed. I know I've flown at least one with my T2, but I've flown them with a U2. I flew one with a pretty ancient Z1. That's a glider from the mid 90s. So I'd want to have something that has at least the glide of a Sport 2. I've never flown it with a single surface glider. The single surface gliders, not only is their glide not as good, but their glide speed is slower. That's a big factor when you're trying to glide into a headwind. Not so much when you're trying to glide downwind, but if you're trying to get into a headwind, then that can definitely be a factor. And that could easily be a factor where if you've flown out to the canyon, you've climbed up, and then you need to glide into the wind along the mountain and find the next thermal. If you're flying something like a Sport 2 or U2 or a topless glider, you'll tend to get to the next thermal quite a bit higher than if you're flying something like a single surface. Like I said, I've never done it on a single surface, and it is a bit of a cross country, and so glide is actually pretty important. I'm sure on the right day it could be done with a single surface, but it'd probably be easier on Sport 2 and up.
Awesome. Thank you.
Carl, I got a question. Carl, what's your hook in? No way. Is that impolite?
No, it's not impolite at all. My hook in weight right now with my, if I'm hooking in with my rotor harness, is probably about 195 pounds. And so that puts me probably a bit on the light side for the 155 Sport 2 or Sport 3. Certainly on the light end for the 155 Gecko. Just about right for the T2. That's a 144 T2. My light speed is a RX 3.5, and I'm pretty close to the middle of the weight range with that glider, but the way the glider flies, it feels like it would like somebody who is about 20 pounds heavier and about 3 or 4 inches taller. So yeah, I'm hooking in about 195, probably maybe 190 if I'm flying with my my tracer, my high energy tracer harness.
Since we're on the subject of hook in weight, are there ever days? Are there days where it's nice to have more weight, or or days where it's better to have less?
Well, I'm not sure that the weight really makes that much of a difference. I think that the type of glider you're flying definitely makes a bigger difference, whether it's single surface or king posted double surface or a topless glider. I haven't really, just the fact that it's really rare for people to be flying with ballast is sort of an indication that flying with more weight or less weight it really doesn't make that much difference. It's a very common thing for sailplanes to be flying with ballast or without ballast, but it's really pretty rare for hang gliders. So I think that the weight issue really doesn't make that much difference, though it really can depend on what kind of conditions you're typically flying in. Like if you're sort of in the position where your hook in weight is sort of halfway in between a smaller glider and a bigger glider, the decision might well be influenced by what kind of conditions you're typically going to fly in. Like if you're typically going to fly in conditions that were really mild, like the light and variable days on the East Coast, where if you're climbing at 200 feet a minute, you're doing great. Then going for the bigger glider might be good. On the other hand, if your typical flying day was out in the great stinking desert out west, where 500 up or 500 down was maintaining, and a typical climb rate was more like 1,000 or 1,500 feet a minute, maybe the smaller glider would be better. I really don't think that the weight 10 or 20 pounds one way or the other really makes that much difference.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thanks to Karl for coming out, and we appreciate him coming out and talking with us again, and we're looking forward to having him up for some more.